the long-awaited game-saving patch is finally here for Helldivers 2. It brings with it a load of changes, all aimed at addressing the community's concerns about balance. Stratagems have been buffed, quality of life has improved, and Super Earth is beginning to heal. But how has this patch impacted primary weapons specifically, as we know that has been a pretty significant sticking point lately? Well, Dr. Pooplove here, and let's discuss. So with the patch comes changes that impact 9 different primary guns, 8 of which are some good buffs. But there is one nerf, which is honestly a bit surprising and a little bit disappointing, as it's kind of significant, but we will get there. Alright, so starting with the buffs, and a big focus with this patch and the buffs has been durable damage, which Arrowhead defines in this way. They say that durable body parts are in general body parts that have a high amount of mass with non-vital organs, or a lot of empty space. The idea is to simulate that a single bullet has a high chance of not dealing significant damage. In general, the higher your caliber of weapon, the better the effect is against durable body parts. Explosions also have a very high effectiveness against durable body parts, as shockwaves ripple through whatever you are hitting. Some weapons are more effective than others, or have special exceptions. So think the spewers' butts, think the top half of berserkers and devastators, and think about those juicy charger butts. These are all areas that will require higher levels of durability damage to be effective against. In this case, a number of these guns received an increase to damage to these durable body parts. And this is a way in which to essentially increase damage and decrease time to kill. And this buff was actually applied and very much aimed at all of the assault rifles, except not you, Liberator Penetrator. Sorry, yeah, you weren't invited to this buff party. But otherwise, these buffs applied to the assault rifles to address the fact that, well, they just seemed pretty weak and underutilized. The durability damage buff, though, was also applied to the Diligence Marksman Rifle, which is a nice change too, as this gun felt pretty useless, at least when compared to the Diligence Counter Sniper. Okay, so this buff applied to many guns, but it was the only buff that was applied to the AR-23 Liberator and the AR-23C Concussive Liberator, as well as the R-63 Diligence. So let's start by talking about these 3. The AR-23 Liberator received an increased projectile damage against durable body parts from 10% to 23%, which is what the concussive used to be, which now the concussive has been buffed to 35%. And the R-63 Diligence received a buff from 10% to 25%. And you can see the difference with these buffs. Essentially, this is just going to mean that your gun is that much more effective at taking down these enemies, and you're not going to be punished as hard for going for some of these bigger body parts. And overall, it will improve the time to kill, which is one of the areas that Arrowhead did want to focus on for this patch. Now, will this convince me to take these guns out over others at this point? I'm not really sure. I don't think this really knocks any of these into a top tier category, but I definitely feel more confident equipping these guns on higher level missions. Also, by the way, check out the new scope on this Diligence. And a lot of the scopes, by the way, have changed, removing some of the scope icons that were kind of like circles and things that were kind of blocking your view. Okay, so let's move on to some of the other buffs. Now, we also have the Adjudicator, which in addition to having a durable damage increase, it also received an increased magazine capacity from 25 to 30. So it's pretty much a big noticeable downside of this gun before, as it always felt like you were running out of bullets too quickly and were always having to reload. The difference of 5 bullets though, it's slight. It's not too big of an impact. You can feel the difference, and at least you can feel more confident that you can take out multiple small enemies or even a few medium enemies without needing to reload so quickly. Just make sure to pulse fire with this thing to not expend everything. And ultimately, I am someone who generally liked where this gun was, but definitely the added clip capacity is much needed. Now to the AR-61 Tenderizer. Now, the buff to the Tenderizer is perhaps one of the best and most consequential buffs that has been made, if for no other reason than the fact that it just now makes this gun stand out as something unique. Because before, it basically had pretty much the same stats as the AR-23 Liberator. So in this case, not only has the durable damage been increased, but the projectile damage itself has been significantly increased from 60 to 95. It did receive a clip reduction of 5 to compensate for this extra increase in damage and a decrease in the number of mags, but there has been increased stagger strength to this gun. It didn't get the medium armor penetration like some wanted, but the high damage of this does feel pretty good with enemies. It also has the stagger, which isn't the strongest, but it does kick in and it does help you. And ultimately, I do see this as a pretty good gun because it is dealing high damage, it's staggering enemies back, and it's pretty accurate. Generally, it does feel good to use. The only real downside I'm seeing right now is the reload speed is quite slow, but I do think this gun is in a much better place than it was before. Now, moving on to the CB9 explosive crossbow, and this is another pretty amazing buff. Most notably now, this crossbow can actually close bug holes and destroy automaton fabricators, which everyone expected it to from the beginning, especially since it shares so many similarities to the Eruptor. Either way, this dramatically makes this gun a lot more viable just for the amazing utility it has now alone. But it also received a little bit of a buff to the explosion armor penetration, so that's the same as the projectile, and we also have added a medium penetration tag. I could have sworn the medium damage marker was already there, but perhaps I'm wrong on that. And now moving on to the other explosive weapon that's pretty close to the crossbow is the R36 Eruptor. Now, this one is interesting. It was very powerful when this gun initially came out. I mean, it was really fucking powerful, but it went through some nerfs, and ultimately there was a removal of the shrapnel, and ever since then it's struggled to really feel that great to use. Now in this case, it did receive a pretty significant damage buff of 150 per shot, which definitely does a lot to increase the damage here. Ultimately though, I kind of just want them to move it back because it's still not quite as powerful, I think, as the way it was. I know the way it was pretty powerful, but the drawbacks were and are still there. So you still have plenty of risks taking this guy out for a spin. And so I think the reward should be significant in the same way that it initially was. I would at least like it to kind of feel as strong as it used to when facing off against the Chargers. One thing to note here is the scope on this thing is pretty freaking cool. I like this redesign. Either way, the Eruptor did receive a buff and it is better than before. Now moving on to the Plaz 101 Purifier, and this did receive a buff, which increased the projectile armor penetration so that it does have the same penetration as the explosion and also decreased the damage fallout. Now the good thing you would expect here because of that increased armor penetration is that unlike guns like the Scorcher, which kind of just allow its explosion to pierce through otherwise heavier medium armor, this will also penetrate armor in addition to the explosion, so it should deal more damage in this respect. But if I'm being honest, it still kind of feels a bit poopy. I think I need more time with this gun to kind of see if there really is true potential here. Maybe I will do a full deep dive on this gun, like a dedicated video, but to be honest, I don't know if this has done enough at this point to make up for the charge up time. It does have a decent sized explosion for some good splash damage, but in most cases, I don't know if I would pick this over the Plasma Punisher to have a big wide explosion. And of course, if you do want to go for accuracy, the Scorcher probably does still end up doing a little bit better, although likely you would expend less bullets due to the penetration level. Regardless though, it has been buffed. Let me know how you feel about this and I'll keep looking into it. Now I want to get to the nerf, which was kind of hidden in the patch notes. Now, the Polar Patriots Warbond, the one that came before this patch, basically had this one standout gun, which was the Pummeler. It's an SMG, which had a very strong stun ability. It dealt less damage, but the stun was definitely something unique that gave it great character, and definitely it wasn't OP. It rather just helped kind of serve a niche. Unfortunately though, this has been nerfed, essentially because medium and large size enemies have now been buffed a bit to not get stunned as easily. And this actually really hits the pummeler hard, more than anything else. Now, what you used to be able to do was be able to freeze a charger in place with the pummeler bullets because of that increased stun. And this was pretty useful. It wasn't the most efficient way to kill a charger in the game, but it served as an interesting strategic way to deal with these guys. But now this has been nerfed and you can't really stun lock these chargers anymore. You can also notice that it doesn't stun spewers as quickly as it used to. And honestly, I just have to say it's a little bit disappointing. I did think that the strong stun served as a cool new way to sort of play the game a little bit differently. I actually really liked this quirky ability and this ability to have some unique strength against some of these bigger enemies. And so I do think that perhaps the wrong lesson was taken away from what this gun was doing. Overall, this whole patch has been great, but this thing does indicate, along with a little bit of some of the hesitancy to bring the old Eruptor back, these kind of indicate that we may just kind of keep having to push a little bit on this front, that guns with personality are good for the fun of this game. Ultimately, I think having some kind of a standout, unique, and interesting trait, such as being able to freeze a charger in place, is something that keeps this game interesting, and it makes guns that you maybe otherwise wouldn't pick up a little bit more unique. I'm not like in love with the pummeler, it's not my favorite gun, but I kind of don't see myself using it anymore because of this. But look, this is just a nitpick, so please don't take this as me hating on the patch. Overall, I do think this patch has been great, and I do feel like the devs have been listening. I think a lot of the guns are more viable now, especially on harder difficulties, and I really like that the devs are hearing us and they're taking the right kind of steps in the majority. It's clear they aren't done because they haven't addressed every gun. Like, I certainly would like to see other buffs, and especially the Liberator, Penetrator probably could have used some love as well, but it's clear the devs aren't done, and I'm excited to see them continue to kind of move this game in this positive direction. But what do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments, and I want to say a special thank you to my YouTube members for joining the Bowel Movement. But otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.